The Subcommittee on Oceans, Atmospheres, Fishery, and the Coast Guard will now come to order. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We had a vote that we needed to get out of the way so we could keep this hearing continuous. But before we turn to today's business, I'd like to acknowledge the impact of two recent hurricanes, Harvey and Irma, and what they've done and had done to our nation. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families affected by the devastation wrought by these storms. Two of our scheduled witnesses are unable to join us today directly due to the fallout from those hurricanes. We wish them and all touched by the storms a speedy recovery. In addition, as chairman of this subcommittee, which also oversees the heroic work of the United States Coast Guard, I am extremely proud of the work that they have done for so many impacted by these hurricanes. I want to thank them for their service as they continue to make all of us proud. Today's hearing is the third in a series of hearings dealing with the reauthorization of the landmark 1976 Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, the MSA. Over the past few months, this committee has heard from dozens of witnesses, including members of the Trump administration, regional fishery management councils, regional stakeholders, tribal representatives, and many, many others. Through these hearings, we have tried to foster a robust dialogue, consensus, hearing from a broad range of witnesses with differing experiences and perspectives in an effort to best equip the members of this subcommittee as we proceed with the important task of reauthorizing the MSA. Last month, I had the privilege of holding a field hearing in Alaska, commonly known as the superpower of seafood, where I heard from many Alaskans and others about their views on the best way to move forward on the MSA reauthorization. In Alaska, our coastal communities rely on a strong, sustainable fishery. We have over 80,000 Alaskans in these communities in this industry, more than even the oil and gas industry in our state. But of course, it's not just Alaska where this industry and the communities impacted by it are so important. There are numerous other states and regions that also rely heavily on the fishing industry, be they commercial, charter, or recreational. And what works in one region of the country doesn't necessarily work in other regions. To more fully examine that, we have a diverse group of witnesses and experts here today to testify in their experiences and offer perspectives on ways to potentially improve on the successes we've achieved over the past 40 years of fisheries management under the MSA. As chairman of this committee, I view the advances achieved during the previous reauthorizations as improvements. At the same time, we've listened to many stakeholders and constituents describe the need for updates and tweaks in the current laws written to effectively continue that progress without rolling back our conservation successes. Additionally, ensuring that Congress supports the need for proper data, supported by reputable and consistent science, is critical to maintaining a sustainable yet profitable national fishery. Technology needs to play a larger role in this, as it has the potential to provide efficiencies, reduce administrative burdens, and increase the accuracy of the data used for stock assessments and catch accountability. As a steward of the MSA, we are all committed to ensuring that our nation's fishery management system supports a stable food supply, including subsistence opportunities, recreational opportunities, and plentiful fishing and processing jobs that provide vibrant coastal communities throughout America. With that, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Ranking Member Peters for any opening statement he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here this afternoon for a third in a series of hearings to discuss the important issue of reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, or MSA. I want to first add to the comments made by Chairman Sullivan and join him in saying that our thoughts are with the people of Florida who have now started the long process of recovering from Hurricane Irma's devastation. Unfortunately, the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Nelson, can't be with us this afternoon to talk about a subject that is of great importance to him and to his constituents, duty calls, and he is back home in Florida helping with the recovery efforts. The storm has also kept two of our witnesses, Captain Gary Jarvis and Captain Robert Zales, from being able to travel, and we are thankful that Captain Bubba Cochran and Mr. Peter Andrew were able to come in their place on very short notice. Thank you for being able to do that. As I mentioned at our first MSA hearing in August, sustainably managing our nation's fisheries through science and data-driven process is critically important, not only to coastal states like Alaska, but also to inland and Great Lakes states like Michigan. The science-driven process implemented through the last two Magnuson-Stevens reauthorizations have rebuilt over 40 different fish stocks, and as of 2015, it has also reduced the number of overfished stocks from 88 to 40, and the number of stocks undergoing overfishing from 78 down to 29, both now at all-time lows. Continuing to reduce overfishing and overfished stocks are key to sustainably managing our fisheries and absolutely critical to supporting the 1.6 million jobs and $207 billion that our fisheries provide to the United States. In Michigan, we know that fisheries are significant to the United States economy and that fishing is part of our way of life in my state as well. Our anglers provide the state of Michigan with $4.3 billion in economic output and support nearly 38,000 jobs. But in the Great Lakes, we also know that managing fish is more important than just managing how many fish can be caught. Other factors in the environment and the ecosystem in the fisheries can have a profound effect. We have seen firsthand the impact of these environmental factors. In the early 20th century, sea lamprey found their way to Lake Erie and then into the upper Great Lakes. Within 50 years, the Great Lakes would never be the same from this devastating parasite. A booming lake trout fishery harvesting 15 million pounds a year was very vulnerable. And by the 1960s, the sea lamprey population would explode and reduce our most abundant fishery to 300,000 pounds caught per year, or just 2% of its prior production. Lessons can be learned from the Great Lakes about the importance of the whole ecosystem. The numbers can look good on paper, but factors extraneous to population models like the introduction of invasive species can affect this important natural resource. That is why it is so important for fisheries management to take into account a changing environment, impacts to habitat, and the food web which different fish species rely on. Ecosystem-based approaches that take into account the whole system can help us foresee and be prepared for the environmental factors that can significantly impact our fisheries. It is hard to know how to sustainably manage fisheries in the face of climate change, changing ocean conditions, and disasters, both natural and man-made. But by listening to the scientists and collecting the necessary data, we can move towards sustainably managing our fisheries for years to come. Today, we will be taking another look at the Magnuson-Stevens Act and our current federal fisheries management framework. It's important to periodically take a good, long look at how these programs are working and how they're being managed. As we go through the process, though, I also think it's important to remember and to acknowledge the success of MSA as we examine the problems and the progress it has helped to make towards sustainably managing our fisheries. We need to focus on sustainability. Is our current framework sustainable for the fishing industry? Is it sustainable for the communities that rely on fishing? And is it sustainable for the fish populations, the natural resource that we are extracting? These hearings provide us with the opportunity to hear from multiple perspectives and answer these questions. At the first hearing, we heard from NOAA and the regional management councils, and today we will hear from commercial, charter, and recreational fisheries. However, these are not all the voices and stakeholders who care about fisheries. There are key groups that we have not heard from. I think it would be remiss if we did not solicit these very important perspectives. So, Mr. Chairman, as we continue to work on MSA, I ask that we engage with scientists, academics, and conservation organizations and strongly consider their recommendations in the legislative process. So in that spirit, I ask unanimous consent that we have a number of letters from these organizations addressing that issue. Would ask that they would be entered into the record without objection.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for pulling this hearing together. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses.
Great. And thank you, Senator Peters. We have, as usual, on this topic, two panels today of numerous distinguished witnesses. The first panel consists of Mr. Philip Faulkner, the president of Nautic Star Boats from the great state of Mississippi. Mr. James Donofrio, executive director of the Recreational Fishing Alliance. Mr. Christopher Horton, senior director, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. And Mr. Anthony Friedrich of Saltwater Angler from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Mr. Faulkner, we will start with you. You will have 5 minutes to deliver an oral statement, and a longer written statement may be included in the record if you so wish.
Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan. There we go. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Member Peters, Senator Wicker, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today about challenges facing the marine recreational anglers and the marine recreational fishing industry. My name is Phil Faulkner, and I'm a recreational fisherman. In my spare time, I like to fish for recreation like millions of my fellow Americans. For my day job, I own a company in Amory, Mississippi, Nautic Star Boats. With more than 25 years of boat building experience, we produce family boats ranging from 18 feet to 28 feet in length, with at least 85% of these boats built for recreational fishing. Our dealer network consists of 75 dealers in 28 states. Let me tell you a little bit about my business and the industry I'm so blessed to be a part of. I work in a uniquely American business, the boat building business. 95% of boats sold in the United States are made in the United States. And here is why. We make the finest quality boats right here in America. According to NOAA's latest economic report, the marine recreational fishing industry contributes $63 billion a year to the U.S. economy from coast to coast in every state in between. More than 70% of the boats purchased in the U.S. are bought for fishing. It's a common misconception that the saltwater fishing economy resides only in the coastal communities. I'm here to report otherwise. And many of my suppliers throughout the U.S. Are situated far from the coast, and many of them are in the landlocked states. I live in a coastal state, but I'm 300 miles away from the coast. At Nautic Star, I employ 300 hardworking Americans in Amory, Mississippi, in Senator Wicker's home state. We take pride in producing the highest quality boats on the market, and we are dedicated to our customers. That's why I am here today, to be the face and the voice for the 440,000 Americans employed in the industry and the 11 million Americans who enjoy recreational fishing on America's public waters. As I sit here today, I could not be more proud of what recreational fishermen and recreational boaters contribute to conservation. We outdoorsmen are the original conservationists. Through license sales and excise taxes paid on fishing equipment and boat motor fuel, anglers and boaters contribute $1.3 billion annually for sport fish conservation and management. An additional $400 million is donated to the conservation and fishing organizations who do so much to support our passion each year. But in recent years, the federal government has been focused on denying public access to America's public resources. This problem has found a solution thanks to Senator Wicker. I would like to thank my senator for sponsoring Senate Bill 1520, the Modern Fish Act. The Modern Fish Act would bring much-needed modernization to the way recreational fishing is managed in federal waters. And this is important because the marine recreational fishermen have felt like an afterthought of the federal government for decades. Federal fishery policies do not reflect the depth and breadth of the recreational fishing industry and the need for more public access for anglers. Furthermore, current federal fishery management is limiting the true economic potential of the recreational fishing industry. With unreasonably short seasons, abrupt fishing closures, and inconsistencies in setting seasons from year to year, recreational anglers and the businesses they support are not fully confident they will have access to America's public marine resources under the current system. Without the confidence of access, anglers don't buy boats and families don't go fishing. The way marine fisheries are managed affects me, it affects my business, and it affects my family. Congress can address these problems by passing the Modern Fish Act. I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. Mr. Donofrio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee. My name is Jim Donofrio. I'm Executive Director of the Recreational Fishing Alliance. The RFA is a 501c4 political action organization. The mission is to fight for the rights of saltwater anglers, support jobs in the recreational marine industry, and support sustainable fisheries. Currently, under the Magnuson Act, our job to fight for anglers' rights and support jobs in our industry is getting harder. Rebuilt sustainable fisheries is not the problem. It is access to those fisheries that is causing loss of angler participation, keeping charter and party boats tied to the dock, and putting tackle and boat sales and service jobs in jeopardy. Right now, because of an over-precautionary Magnuson Act, our sector cannot access many robust fisheries, including red snapper, black sea bass, summer flounder, cod, haddock, and a list of others. Keep in mind, because of the current law, no state and not even the administration can give us more fish to catch because it would be a violation of federal law. Mr. Chairman, we need the amendments in the bipartisan Modernizing Recreational Fisheries Management Act, S-1520, to be put into law. These amendments, if passed, would allow for conservation, continued sustainability, and better access for those robust stocks that we cannot access at this time. We view these changes as improvements, not rollbacks. Please remember, the RFA is supported by the National Marine Manufacturers Association, Viking Yacht Company, Yamaha, Contender Boats, Maverick Boat Group, and many other boat and motor companies, as well as many tackle companies. And contrary to what our opposition may tell you, Mr. Chairman, the business models for these companies do not allow us to catch the last fish. The Modern Fish Act, if passed, would address specific needs of the recreational fishing industry. Historically, MSA has focused on commercial fishing and has mandated a commercial-style management approach. It is undeniable that this approach is the cause of many important fish stocks being rebuilt to historic levels of abundance. However, the consequences of this approach, particularly the use of annual catch limits in our sector, has had a negative impact on the recreational fishing industry. Recreational fishermen played a significant role in rebuilding, yet we do not enjoy the benefits of the rebuilding on an equitable level. We believe S-1520 takes a step in the right direction by allowing recreational anglers to be managed different from the commercial fishermen, and so they can enjoy the benefits of rebuilt stocks. Specifically, the Modern Fish Act allows federal fisheries managers to use alternative management approaches for recreational fishing, similar to state management through interstate commissions that better align with the nature of recreational fishing and available data to manage and monitor our sector. It also provides limited exemptions for application of the annual catch limits. The open access characteristics and limitations with regards to data collection associated with the recreational sector are simply not compatible with annual catch limits. This is not to imply that the recreational anglers want no accountability or they want to fish without restrictions. In many recreational fisheries, there are far better ways of monitoring the recreational sector, and they're more practical and fair than the annual catch limits. It also provides limited flexibility with rebuilding fish stocks and allows managers to take into consideration international fishery treaties and ecosystem interaction. It temporarily limits the expansion of limited access privilege programs and catch shares and calls for the National Academy of Science to study the impacts of this management approach. And finally, it calls for improvements to the recreational fishing data collection by allowing consideration and inclusion of information from fishermen, universities, and other third parties, as well as fostering federal-state partnerships to improve data collection. Mr. Chairman, it's been over 10 years since Magnuson was revisited, and as you know, fisheries are in a dynamic, ever-changing environment. Fisheries change, science change, and we can't get the help from the bureaucracy we need. We need Congress to modernize the law now with the Modern Fish Act and put this all together for us. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Donofrio. Mr. Horton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan, Senator Peters, members of the subcommittee. My name is Chris Horton, and I'm the Senior Fisheries Program Director for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Established in 1989, CSF works with the bipartisan members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, the 48 state legislative sportsmen's caucuses, and the Governor's Sportsmen's Caucus on recreational angling and other sportsman-related issues. I began my career as a fisheries biologist for a state natural resource agency. Prior to joining CSF in 2010, I was the Conservation Director for BASS, the largest angling organization in the world. I currently serve on the MPA Federal Advisory Committee, and I previously served on the Sport Fishing Boating Partnership Council and the board of the National Fish Habitat Partnership. I'm an avid angler who has been blessed with the opportunity to fish all around this great nation, including making the annual family pilgrimage to the Gulf of Mexico to fish for red snapper. I sincerely thank the members of this subcommittee for the opportunity to speak to you today regarding the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Recreational saltwater anglers are an important and significant component of our nation's marine fisheries. According to NOAA, there are 9 million saltwater anglers who take nearly 61 million fishing-related trips and who contribute $63 billion in sales impacts to our economy. However, as important as those numbers are, the role that anglers play as conservationists in our dedication to ensuring sustainable fisheries is often misunderstood or overlooked. It is important this committee understand that managing for better recreational fishing opportunities is not counter to the conservation goals of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, but rather complementary. During the 1940s, realizing that fishing license fees alone were not enough to restore fisheries resources, anglers in the sport fishing community lobbied Congress to impose an excise tax similar to the Pittman-Robertson Act for wildlife to benefit fisheries and aquatic habitat restoration. The Federal Aid and Sport Fish Restoration Act, or better known as the Dingell-Johnson Act, was finally passed in 1950, which implemented a new 10% excise tax on rods, reels, and fishing tackle. In 1984, the Wallet-Brough Amendment to the Act, again led by anglers in the sport fishing and boating industries, expanded that list of taxable items and included a tax on motorboat fuels. Since 1951, these taxes generated more than $8.6 billion for our fisheries. When combined with recreational fishing licenses, the total funds anglers have willingly paid for both freshwater and marine fish conservation is around $27.3 billion. This user-pays, public benefits model is largely responsible for the abundant fisheries that we have today. However, even beyond their license fees and excise taxes, angling organizations like the Coastal Conservation Association and countless others often donate additional money and volunteer time to ensure healthy fisheries. Since its original passage in 1976, the Magnuson-Stevens Act has made significant progress in ending overfishing and rebuilding depleted fish stocks. However, it remains primarily a model for commercial fisheries and fails to adequately address the significant socioeconomic, cultural, and conservation values of recreational fishing. For this reason, we support making a few minor adjustments to the Magnuson-Stevens Act found in the Bipartisan Modern Fish Act, or S-1520, that facilitates better management of the recreational sector while still ensuring sustainability of our fisheries resources. For instance, we need workable management options. Currently, federal recreational fisheries are primarily managed the same as commercial fisheries, with ACLs based on hard pound quotas. This simply doesn't work well for the recreational sector. We need other tools in the toolbox that are more appropriate for the recreational component of the fishery. Whereas in the South Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, most allocation decisions were made in the 1980s and 90s based on catch data from that time. Things have changed in 30 years, though nearly all allocations have remained the same. Unfortunately, there is no good mechanism nor incentive to prompt a review of allocations by the councils. Finally, we need to incorporate more non-federal data and data collection approaches into fishery management decisions. As good as MRIP may be for long-term trends over multiple species, it was never intended to be used for in-season management of individual species, especially in very short seasons. We need new approaches that allow the states, universities, and anglers to provide the solutions. In summary, recreational anglers were among the nation's original conservationists and continue to be. We have always readily and personally invested in the long-term sustainability of our fisheries resources. We need the changes to MSA found in S 1520. They will not weaken the conservation principles of the law, but they would provide the necessary tools to manage recreational fisheries more appropriately and with the same level of emphasis as commercial fisheries. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Horton. Mr. Friedrich, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Tony Friedrich. I am a lifelong recreational fisherman currently residing on the eastern shore of Maryland. There's never been a single moment in my life where my heart wasn't firmly planted in the outdoors. I've sat on countless councils, advisory boards, and committees over the last 20 years. For almost 8 years, I was the executive director for the Coastal Conservation Association of Maryland. The fishermen I know care about conservation. I work tirelessly with them on habitat issues, forage species conservation, and improving scientific methods and practices. I've seen good and bad fisheries management decisions, and I've seen fish populations either recover or crash as a result. In my experience, those failures always stem from one problem: a failure to put the resource first. The task of reauthorizing Magnus and Stevens is an incredibly noble endeavor. As we proceed, I just ask we remember these words. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Prior to 1996, the passage of the Sustainable Fisheries Act, New England groundfish, red snapper, summer flounder were just a few of the 86 overfished species that were on the verge of disaster. But thanks to the law and the subsequent reauthorization in 2007, things started to slowly get better. Measures were put in place that set up annual catch limits on science-based initiatives that prevented overfishing. Depleted stocks had rebuilding plans, and it restored them to sustainable levels. June 30th, 2017, only 30 stocks were still on that list. It's really hard for me to think of another law that had that much impact in such a short period of time. Yet, legislative flexibility and recent decisions by the Secretary of Commerce on red snapper and summer flounder will likely allow overfishing and are a very serious concern. If you want to see the results of this kind of flexibility in action, you have to look no further than the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission. Its management is not held to the same standards as MSA. They can ignore overfishing and are not required to rebuild overfished stocks because striped bass right now are hovering just above the threshold where they'll be overfished, the spawning stock biomass. And striped bass on the Atlantic coast, which again are not managed under MSA, are a great example why sustainable limits are needed. In 1986, the stock was collapsing. East Coast anglers only made 300,000 trips. Rather than address the issue in a timely manner, ASMFC waited till the situation became very extreme and a moratorium was necessary. The stock did not get declared rebuilt until 1995. At that juncture, there were 5 million trips by anglers. Fast forward to 2007, there were 10.5 million trips by anglers. During that entire time frame, the creel limit did not change. We don't need to kill more fish. We need access to abundant populations. Annual catch limits the lack of annual catch limits leave striped bass very susceptible to overfishing. Annual catch limits allow managers to respond in a timely manner to changes in the fishery. Striped bass are managed by mortality rates, which is an alternative management measure many tout today as the way forward. But what it means is we can't compare our catch to a sustainable limit at the end of each year. We have to wait years for stock assessments to tell us how things are going. While we're waiting, we're still fishing at the same rates. Leave striped bass in a situation where it takes years to acknowledge overfishing and even longer to address it. If we want to support the $115 billion recreational industry and the 800,000 jobs it supports, we have to focus on stable and abundant fish populations that are managed by science-based catch limits for the benefit of the general public. It's not just striped bass that are in decline with ASMFC, American eel, American shad, horseshoe crab, tautog, all in trouble. Weak fish populations, they're so low that there may not be enough genetic diversity left in the stock to support a recovery. As a father, that kills me. I'll never sit on the beach on a full moon and wait for those tide runners to come in with my son. I'll never show him the fangs on those fish. I'll never show him the beautiful yellow color on the inside of their mouth. I'll never show them the purple hues on their back. They won't come back because of inaction. We knew what to do to save them, but we just kept catching them. Rather than pursuing a misguided flexibility, reauthorization presents all of us with an incredible opportunity. Fishermen I know want to improve protections for essential habitat, maintain adequate forage bases. They're not interested in removing annual catch limits. They know that flexibility is a euphemism for overharvest. They're keenly aware that transferring management to states removes many of the safeguards for Magnus and Stephen and opens the door to overfishing. We have a great we have much great work that we can accomplish. Why do we want to break the things that are working? As fisheries collapse around the world, 89% of our domestic fisheries are not overfished. The Magnuson-Stevens Act is working. We can make it better. Managers need a funding source for better and more frequent stock assessments. We should look to improve data collection methods for the recreational sector. Data collection and overall performance of MRIP is being called into question. Anyone who calls that into question never had to deal with MRFs. MRIP is working. My solemn prayer is that I can convince you all that recreational fishermen are true conservationists. Our #1 desire is to watch our children and grandchildren embrace the outdoor heritage that makes this country so unique. Thank you so much for letting me participate in this. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I look forward to any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Mr. Friedrich, and thank you, gentlemen, for your outstanding testimony. I am going to yield my time at the outset here, as I know Senator Inhofe has a time commitment, so I'm going to yield my time, and I'll come back with questions at a later round. But Senator Inhofe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's very nice of you, and the ranking member, too. Yeah, something you just said kind of sparked me a little bit when you talked about the people who are most concerned are those users. There's somehow this mentality in Washington that the government, the federal government, has to make these things happen. We feel very strongly that people who are farmers or that own their own land are more concerned about the conservation and the quality than government. Mr. Faulkner, years ago, back when I enjoyed life, I was a builder and developer in South Padre Island, Texas. Now, I know Mr. Horton knows where that is, but you're probably somewhat familiar with that. And, you know, there's this thought that if you're not from a coastal state, that somehow you don't have that close connection. But that's not true. Of course, I worked down there, and I was down there virtually every week anyway. But also many companies. Hydro Hoist in Oklahoma is one of the largest in the world along the line of those products. I know that Mick Weber has started that thing from just almost nothing. So we have a lot of activity and a lot of interest in what happens down there on the coast. Now, this year it took a cooperative agreement negotiated by multiple stakeholders, and I was here at the hearing, to lengthen the red snapper season for private recreational anglers in the federal Gulf Coast waters. Well, the problem was that we went through a period of time up until about 2005 when we had a real problem with the number of snappers that are out there. Now, when that changed, then it took. I'd like to have you kind of succinctly highlight for this committee how punitive recreational fishing regulations and the uncertainty as to the length of a federal fishing season negatively impact your business and what we're all here for.
Thank you, Senator. Well, my answer is two parts. As a recreational fisherman myself, I think at times the uncertainty, certainly 3-day seasons or 9-day seasons, and it storms for 5 of those, is very limited. It's just unpredictable, and it just so much compacts your time out there that it's a mad race to go out there, sometimes when it's not even safe seas to be out fishing. And I'm speaking predominantly on the red snapper. I think that's what you were referring to. But I think the uncertainty also from the manufacturing side of it is our customers making a large investment in time for their family and certainly financially. The uncertainty just isn't worth the risk if they're not going to be guaranteed some fair time to be out there to participate. And I think the word uncertainty is what's been the biggest problem over the last 10 years.
Yeah, that is a problem. And Mr. Horton, you commented your activity down in the area that you and I are both familiar with. And I think a key component of the Modern Fish Act is adapting federal fisheries in management and embrace recreational fishing as well as commercial fishing, something we've heard a lot about. I'd ask you, do you think have the states done a better job than the federal government?
Yes, sir, I think so, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, the states tend to manage differently than the federal government in the fact that the states manage for population abundance and health because they're trying to manage for maximum access for the people. I mean, recreational anglers are essentially their customers, and so they want to make sure that we have access to healthy, abundant fisheries. Whereas the federal management tends to manage federal fisheries more as really a commodity, and they don't manage it quite like a public trust resource. So maximum access isn't the ultimate goal. Maximum sustainable yield is the ultimate goal, essentially, or optimal yield. So I feel like the states, from a recreational angling perspective, and the models that they use that maximize access is more effective.
What I'd like to have all of you do is give some thought to how the federal government, if we're talking about making changes, not just in this act, but in other acts to try to enhance what this is all about today. But give some thoughts to what specifically is it that the federal government could learn from the states so that we can treat this not just as a one-shot thing, but come back here for other improvements in the future.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for putting me in.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for your testimony today. I certainly appreciated hearing from each of you. Mr. Horton, I appreciate when you mentioned you fished all across the United States. I hope the Great Lakes was part of that fishing expedition across the United States?
Lake St. Clair is my favorite bass lake in the country.
All right, good to hear that.
And I'm assuming Alaska was in there, too.
Halibut fishing in Kenai River, yes, sir.
Well, I'm very pleased that you're in Lake Michigan or in one of the Great Lakes in St. Clair. Not really one of the Great Lakes, but you can get to the other bigger lakes too as you continue to travel around. We are a coastal state as well in the fact that we have more miles of coastline than any other state except Alaska. Sure. But of course, it's all freshwater. And I'm also, Mr. Faulkner, appreciated your comments on the boat industry. We have more boat registrations than any state in the country in the state of Michigan. So we are a state of boaters. We are a state of anglers. We love fishing. And I certainly appreciate all the comments of all of you that folks who enjoy fishing are also great conservationists. They realize that there's something to cherish. It is a sport that passes down to generation. But you need fish in order to go fishing, which is a key aspect of it, and they fully recognize that. However, over the last several years, the question is, it seems like some of the larger membership groups that focus on fish conservation have stopped talking about ensuring abundance of fishery resources as a goal that seems to me, at least, to benefit everybody. The more fish you have, the better. And are now more focused on things like expanding a perceived lack of access to fish resources. And in many cases, it seems to me the lack of access grows directly out of a lack of abundance. You've got to have abundance first. Mr. Frederick, I want to ask the question, why do you think this shift has occurred? Has it occurred, and why do you think that is occurring? And does it make more sense to be focusing on abundance?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. You know, shifts occur for a lot of different reasons. The numbers that I quoted in my testimony are very real. From 1986, when striped bass populations were collapsing, and there were only 300,000 trips, and then they hit a peak in population, and there were 10.5 million trips, and the creel limit never changed. As recreational fishermen, we're in it for the experience. I enjoy seeing, you know, dolphins go by my boat, or to see a bald eagle, and I really like catching fish. I really like it when I'm out there catching fish. If there are no fish to catch, I'm not going to go fishing, and that is true of all recreational fishermen. I have not measured my day on how many fish I can kill in so long I can't remember. We're more about the experience, and I think the numbers that you'll see, when fish populations are abundant, the economy benefits. When fish populations are not abundant, the economy does not benefit. We absolutely have to manage fish for abundance. We have to make sure that they have the habitat and the forage species necessary to increase the carrying capacity in any system to support that abundance. And again, I think we have an incredible opportunity when we're taking a look at Magnuson to really make it stronger to support fisheries 50 years from now or 100 years from now. And again, the only thing that we really want is to see our kids and grandkids smile when they're reeling a fish in. I don't want to tell my son that we can't go fishing because we can't catch those species until they recover. We all rely on this for our lives, our recreation, the boat builders, all the organizations that rely on healthy fisheries. That should be our focus. That's not weakening Magnuson, strengthening Magnuson.
And part of that focus in your that you reference in your testimony that we just heard, you also reference in your written testimony that we need to ensure adequate forage fish population. And I think you touched on some of the negative consequences when populations get too low. Why do you think forage conservation is so important, and do you think the kinds of policies that you have advocated for in the Mid-Atlantic would be effective nationwide, something we should be considering?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not a personal bias either. There's a little oily fish called a menhaden that pretty much lives from Maine to Florida. Several years ago, menhaden were at the lowest level of their abundance, about 8% of a virgin stock. It affected everything. Striped bass contracted mycobacteriosis, which is a wasting disease, 100% fatal in aquaculture. We're still trying to figure out how many of them died from that. But they were malnourished. Ospreys had the lowest chick recruitment since DDT was taken off the market. Everything suffered. Weakfish, I mentioned weakfish. They're a soft-rayed fish. The natural mortality skyrocketed on weakfish because they're like little Snickers bars to striped bass. So we are growing them to 11 inches, and they are disappearing because that biomass that comes down the coast is waiting at the mouth of Hudson Bay, Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay for those young of the year menhaden to leave the estuaries when the water gets colder. It's very similar to the migration in Serengeti. It's just underwater, so y'all can't see it. But it's a very real thing. And when forage species are absent, other species become the forage. It takes 1,000 bay anchovies to equal one adult menhaden. Okay, when we brought those menhaden back, it was just a 20% reduction that we got. Mycobacteriosis was a thing of the past. Osprey recruitment recovered immediately. There's a slight uptick in the weakfish population, but we may have knocked them down so low that, like I said, they're never coming back. But you can't remove the keystone species of an ecosystem and expect everything to be okay. It's not going to be okay. It's probably the thing that I'm the most proud of. That one victory, and all the conservation victories that I did, it's the one thing that made the most difference. And living on the Eastern Shore, when I drove over here today, I counted half a dozen schools of menhaden when I was driving over the Bay Bridge. And I was watching birds feed on them. I was watching juvenile striped bass feed on them, everything. And it makes you feel good inside when you know you did something decent for the world.
Great. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator Wicker.
Mr. Horton, how long have you been having this annual pilgrimage to hunt red snap, to fish red snapper?
Well, prior to joining CSF in 2010, I worked for BASS, and we were based out of Orlando, Florida at the time. So when we first moved there in 2005, I bought a bay boat, and you take a boy from the hills of Arkansas and give him a saltwater environment to fish in. I went crazy and wanted to try to learn to catch everything. So I started catching red snapper then, and since coming to work for CSF in 2010, 2011, I missed that year, but I've been down there every year since.
What did you think when you heard about a 72-hour season?
I knew I had a suspicion that it was coming.
We don't know what the season's going to be next year, do we?
That's true. That's the variability is in question. I think a lot of folks may be surprised that we don't exceed the quota quite as much as what was originally thought. But
you know, I think if there was a little more certainty, Mr. Faulkner might be able to sell a few more boats. You know, I didn't ask this, Mr. Faulkner, but a couple of generations back, you've got to be somehow kin to William Faulkner, aren't you?
You know, I'm not sure. I haven't reached any inheritance from it, so I don't guess I can claim much of that.
Not that close, kin.
We lived in the same neck of the woods, though.
That's absolutely true. Mr. Faulkner wrote a book called Go Down Moses, had a bunch of short stories in it. And this was about hunting, not fishing. But young Isaac McCaslin sort of came of age during these short stories. And in one story entitled The Old People, his cousin McCaslin Edmonds is quoted as saying this: "The earth don't want to just keep things, hoard them. It wants to use them again." And I think that's what you're saying and the other witnesses are saying about how recreational fishermen are conservationists, because we know, along with Mother Earth, that we don't want to keep these things. We want to use them over and over. And so I appreciate what you and your fellow witnesses have done for conservation. You provide directly 300 jobs in Amory, Mississippi.
Correct.
Are you an Amory Panther?
I am.
Okay. Well, I was a Pontotoc Warrior back in the day.
Just
I wasn't much of one, but I was there.
Just up the road.
But in addition to that, every dealership in these 28 states provides jobs where they sell your boats. And congratulations on having such a wide range of buyers who like your product. Also, when you make a boat, there are folks making a living in Arlington Heights, Illinois, Collierville, Tennessee, Fort Smith, Arkansas, Mr. Horton, Litchfield, Illinois, and Limerick, Pennsylvania. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And so it's a part of this that what we're talking about today is not only recreation and using our God-given resources, but also providing jobs for Americans across this great land and not just in the coastal area. Mr. Faulkner, you mentioned uncertainty about access, uncertainty about fishing seasons, and we mentioned the notorious example of the 72-hour season. Now, that was expanded then to 39 weekend days, but we really don't know what that season's going to be next year, do we?
No,
so if somebody's looking to buy a boat, and if red snapper's their thing, it's hard for them to decide to fork over a considerable amount of money if they don't know how much fishing they're going to be able to do. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's such a commitment. I mean, from the family side of it, are we going to go to, ball games this year? Or are we going to make that commitment to that boat? We're going to go out, and we're going to use that boat, and we're going to make a huge investment of our hard-earned money. And if we don't know if there's going to be a 3-day season or a 7-day season or a 37-weekend season, then there's a real good chance that purchase isn't going to happen, and it certainly affects us.
Mr. Chairman, let me take that extra 60 seconds. that Senator Peters took. Mr. Donofrio, you and Mr. Friedrich have a difference of opinion about the 2007 changes to the act. You think it was a disaster, and he thinks it was quite the thing. So where's he wrong?
Thank you, Senator. Well, the last reauthorization, with the terrible data system that we have in place, and as you probably realize, the House years ago when Chairman Saxton was on board and Chairman Gilchrist, they demanded that the ASMFC look into the data collection system. They had like 2 or 3 years to fix it after the National Academy of Science came out with their report. I think it took them 10 years before they came out with another program. So they changed the MRF program to the MERP. And all it is a cross-dresser. It's the same program. They're not doing real-time intercepts. They're getting terrible data. It's meant for, as Chris said, it's just meant for trends. And so the ACLs, when they butt up against the bad data, it creates an overfishing definition that's not biological, it's statutory. So right now, for instance, we're tripping over certain species of fish. You're walking on them. It's unsafe for your dog to go swimming in the water, and yet we're overfishing on these fish. There's so many of them because it's statutory in nature, not biological. That's what has to be fixed. And as I pointed in my testimony, Senator, the models for Mr. Faulkner's company, for Yamaha, for Viking, the companies we represent, their models that won't allow us to catch the last fish. They'll be out of business. We'll have no employees anywhere. So we want conservation, long-term sustainability. We have to modernize the act. It has to change with the times and the amount of fish that are available.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Everybody, I think, knows that climate change is having an effect on our fish population, particularly where the fish live, not only their numbers, but where they can be found. And some of the effects of climate change have been to drive fish that once were a mainstay for Connecticut fishermen north, but Connecticut's fishermen are still governed by the same quotas and rules as if climate change and that migration of fish had never happened. We're dealing with a system that essentially is broken. Stocks of Black Sea, summer flounder, and scup have quotas that are outdated based on where the fish are. Essentially, Connecticut fishermen have been barred from catching economically sustainable quantities of fish in or near our state's waters. When fishermen haul a larger catch than their permissible quota, which happens often, the fishermen have to throw their excess overboard. That benefits nobody. It wastes food. It doesn't bring the fish back to life. By that point, the bycatch are often dead or near dead, and they're left to rot in the water. The dead discards are voluminous. I've heard and spoken to the fishermen. I don't know how many of you in your parts of the country are familiar with this phenomenon, but I suspect it's more than just Connecticut or New England, really New England. The Magnuson-Stevenson Act, which is the relevant law here, requires the Department of Commerce to ensure fishery management plans adhere to national standards, including, quote, best scientific information available to decide catch limits. And any management plan, quote, shall not discriminate between residents of different states, end quote, and must allow quotas that are, quote, fair and equitable. So I have a very simple question. Do you think that the councils currently use the best information available to all of you? Yes, sir.
No, Senator, and as you know, that NOAA is very protective of their science called the best available science, and I'd give you a perfect example. There's a group in New Jersey, Save the Summer Flounder Foundation. They hired some of the best PhDs in the country, non-biased PhDs, to get us science on summer flounder. And if we did not go to members of Congress to help get that through, NOAA didn't want to accept it. we had to actually fight them. We had to fight no, because if we had to get our congressman to actually do it. We had to get Senator Schumer. We had to get a bunch of people to actually, members of Congress, to actually tell NOAA to move that science forward, because it's real science. And they hide under their science, and they're very protective of it, and that has to change.
Any others of you have an opinion on this issue?
Well, Senator, to your question about do you think the councils use the best available science and the councils and NOAA fisheries in general, I would have to say, at least in the Gulf of Mexico's perspective, again, when it comes to the Marine Recreational Information Program in a season like red snapper that's just literally days or weeks, where the MRIP data collection process is basically 2 months at best before you can get the estimate back. There's no way to do in-season closures there. So the states, many of the states have developed their own data collection programs, yet unfortunately MRIP is the only one still used in stock assessments right now. But the states are able, at least the Gulf states, are able to get much more timely information and data.
States have better information.
When it comes to angler harvest data in the Gulf of Mexico, yes, sir.
Which is not used because they're limited or limiting themselves to federal information.
Because NOAA Fisheries has yet to certify the state data collection programs to be used in stock assessments.
I want to make one other point, which may not be of direct concern to this panel, but I think it's important to note. During a recent hearing, in fact, his confirmation hearing, Wilbur Ross was asked by me before his confirmation as Secretary of Commerce about the serious trade imbalance between our country and foreign competitors on seafood. For all the seafood consumed in this country, only 10% comes from the United States. Think of it for a moment. All the seafood that we eat, and we're eating more and more of it because it's touted as being healthful, only 10% of it comes from the United States. The other 90% comes from other countries. Those numbers are going in the wrong direction, not the right one, as the percentage of foreign seafood consumed in this country has been increasing over time. I raised this issue of fishing quotas with Wilbur Ross at his confirmation hearing, and he stressed his commitment to ensure that quotas, quote, are allocated properly. We're at the 8-month mark of this administration. We've heard nothing from the administration about this issue. I could ask you rhetorically if you want to comment on whether the administration is doing enough on this issue. I'm opening it to your comment if you have any.
Can I take one step back before we take a step forward, and just the previous question, if we feel that the councils are privy to the best science and our state's doing a better job?
If the chairman, I'm already over my time, so the chairman has a right to cut both of us off at any time. So with his permission,
I'm new here. Whatever anyone wants to do, I'll follow.
So if you can keep it brief, I think that'd be fine.
Thank you very much, sir. What you'll find is people tout La Creel, which is Louisiana's answer to catching, to keeping count of how many red snapper they're catching. La Creel is MRIP with more funding. They have more intercepts and more phone calls. So again, if this is truly worth $115 billion a year and 800,000 jobs, we ought to fund the heck out of MRIP. Because you can't say La Creel is good and criticize MRIP. You can't do it. It's the same thing with more intercepts. To hop right into your second question, as far as the seafood, you know, there are trends, success stories in Virginia with oyster aquaculture. It is a zero carbon emission proposition. They are filtering the water as the oyster watermen are harvesting them. They are harvesting them either from floats, cages, or on the bottom. They are not using power dredges and damaging natural habitat. So we have answers sitting right in front of us. This is not salmon aquaculture where 400,000 of them swim out of a pen and infect all the native salmon and it's the end of the world. These are native Maryland and Virginia oysters, Chesapeake Bay oysters, that are being essentially farmed in their native habitat. And if I'll point to examples on St. Jerome's Creek in Maryland where the creek has actually changed. From them filtering the water, where they're being aquaculture, where they're being harvested via aquaculture, it's not muck, it's now sand bottom. And I have pictures of juvenile Nassau grouper in the Chesapeake Bay in the oyster cages. They're bringing life back. So it's kind of a win-win-win. We can get there.
Yeah, we're doing aquaculture in Connecticut as well.
And y'all have the opportunity to do seafood, you know, the seaweed, everything. It's incredible what y'all have in the ocean, what y'all are able to do. We can get there.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to a couple questions of my own here. First, with all the panelists, you know, there's been particularly the first three, but all of you really talking about recreational fishing and commercial fishing and the difference from one another in terms of their management needs. Can you, any of you want to speak to that issue? I know it's an important issue to a number of you, and it was raised in each of your testimony. Yes, sir. Mr. Donofrio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, NOAA manages us through the councils in pounds, and for commercial sector, that works well. They have boxes of fish, they get to the dock, they count the boxes, and off they go. And we're managing pounds. So what happens is, let's say they do a stock assessment, and they tell us we need to cut back a little bit. So in order to cut back a little bit, they go up in size. When you go up in size, what do? You go up in pounds. So it's a counterintuitive program that's in place for us, and this is why we have ask Senator Nelson and Senator Wicker to incorporate the alternative management in the Modern Fish Act, because the councils need other tools to manage us. And what works for the commercials don't necessarily work for us. So that's a good example of how counterintuitive that program is.
Any other thoughts on that issue, just the commercial, recreational management tools that, from your perspective, you see are different that we would need to address?
There's never been a greater opportunity as modern day where recreational fishermen can step up to the plate and do their part. We can't sit on these panels and tell y'all how bad things and how tough things are for us and then complain about the science and not step up and say, I've got a smartphone in my pocket, I'm going to put a little bit of the responsibility on my shoulders, and we're going to figure out a way where I can report more accurate numbers to the managers and the scientists. The scientists are just doing their job. They're doing exactly what we tell them to do, and they're smart people. They deserve to be better funded, and they certainly don't deserve to be criticized. We have to step up to the plate. As Executive Director, CCA Maryland, we ran a trial program called Chesapeake Catch, where it was not successful, but a few times the first time you try something, it's successful. But it was a smartphone app where anglers could track the fish that they caught, and it would go directly to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources with the information that their biologists found most valuable. So, I was taught from a very young age, sir, that you don't complain about something unless you have a solution for it. So my solution is, as a group, we step up to the plate and provide better data, because those scientists are probably some of the best people you ever meet.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Frieder. I want to make sure I get to some of the other witnesses here. Mr. Faulkner, your point on the kind of broader impacts to all the states, I actually thought was a really powerful one, and it's not well recognized. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your supply network, even beyond Mississippi, and how the MSA legislation does or does not impact that?
Sure. Well, again, state of Michigan, Atwood Products, huge source of all types of marine supplies, and thousands of employees there are employed because of fishing boats, and particularly at this point in time, center console boats seem to be the more percentage of growth in the last 5 or 6 years. And these boats are now used more for family than just serious even recreational fishermen or tournament-type fishermen. They're family boats that they will go out and they will love to go and catch their two, which is a pretty limited amount, but good that it is, red snapper. Then they use their boat for, other recreational purposes, but that gives them the ability to go out and use their boat for other things. And then we just have a lot of suppliers. I would say there's hundreds of parts in a boat that are manufactured in so many states across the union, and it's just huge for us to be able to have that access and to still conserve. If we don't have fish, obviously we won't have a need for a boat. So we're very conservation-minded, but a little more access, and the local, not local, more so the state governments and the state biologists are so in touch with that, because it varies from even in the Gulf, from the Florida coast to Louisiana. Yeah. And each one of those need a different governance and limits.
Let me ask one final question, Mr. Horton. I'll ask you to respond, and if others want to touch on it. I touched on it in my opening statement. A lot of you have been focused on it, and that is the data management issues that exist today, how they impact recreational fisheries, and how we can look at improving those, again, relative to how we use that data management processes on the commercial side. Do you have a view on that, Mr. Horton?
Well, certainly from the recreational perspective side. Like I said in my testimony, MRIP's it's actually a really good model for to estimate long-term trends over multiple species, but it really doesn't provide the finite data for management for in-season closures to allocations and quotas, which is why it's very difficult to manage the recreational sector to an ACE and hard poundage ACL, because the estimates we get are months from the time that the fishing actually occurred. So we don't know if we're overfishing or not, so we have to put conservative buffers. And again, that goes back to the point that we need to look at other management alternatives where we're not necessarily looking at hard pound quotas, but there are other things, the harvest rate that so many states use for inland species. I mean, Florida uses a 35% SPR for spotted sea trout, and they've been able to maintain, just with seasons and bag limits, they've been able to maintain above that threshold. And even sometimes the populations are going to fluctuate, sometimes they're going to go back up, and angling effort typically follows that cycle. But one of the things that it's not just fishing pressure that puts pressure on populations. There are natural variances to recruitment in any given year class coming in to the fishery. So it's not always fishermen. So you will see variations up and down, but we can't count every fish that the recreational anglers fish. So we need a management model that's not a hard pound quota that allows for some of that variability. Still having a solid conservation threshold, because if it drops below 35%, Florida will take some action with their anglers. And their anglers all support it, that yes, our population's in trouble. Whatever we need to do, shut the season down for 6 months, reduce our bag, increase the size, whatever it takes.
Well, thank you very much for that. Listen, I want to thank this first panel. Outstanding job, as we expected. I also want to remind the witnesses that the hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks, and senators will be able to submit additional questions. And if you do get additional questions, we would respectfully ask you to try to respond to those as soon as possible. So I'd like to dismiss the first panel. Thank you again, and invite the second panel up to begin your testimony as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There we go.
Is that Senator Bozeman or somebody that says something around that? Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you. I appreciate it. Yes.
Okay, I'd like to begin with our second panel, and I'm going to ask each witness to deliver a 5-minute oral statement. If you have a longer statement, we'd be glad to include that written statement in the record. I want to welcome our second panel of witnesses. Starting from our left is Mrs. Lori Steele, Executive Director, West Coast Seafood Processors Association. Mr. Peter Andrew, who's a board member of Bristol Bay Native Corporation. In my opening statement, I talked about Alaska as the superpower of seafood. Almost 60% of all the seafood harvested in the United States comes from the waters of Alaska, and a lot of those come from Bristol Bay. Mr. Gregory D'Amicino, if I got that right, sir, Executive Director of Garden State Seafood Association, and Captain William Bubba Cochran, President, Gulf of Mexico Reef Fish Shareholders Alliance. Again, welcome to our panelists. Ms. Steele, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective on the MSA reauthorization. I'm confident that we can build on lessons learned from our past experiences to fulfill one of the Act's fundamental and original goals emphasized in National Standard 1, to prevent overfishing while achieving on a continuing basis the optimum yield from each fishery. On the West Coast, the conservation successes under the MSA have been significant. Almost all groundfish stocks overfished at some point in the last 15 years are now rebuilt, many ahead of schedule. Most fisheries are 100% monitored and fully accountable, and bycatch has been greatly reduced. However, the economic challenges that remain are even more significant. The non-whiting groundfish IFQ fishery is an economic failure. Regulatory constraints imposed by restrictive rebuilding requirements and lack of management flexibility preclude achieving optimum yield for many stocks. We harvest approximately 20 to 30% of our available non-whiting groundfish quotas, falling far short of meeting National Standard 1. Reforms are necessary to provide the councils with more flexibility to achieve the Act's objectives while meeting the socioeconomic needs of communities. I'm certain that we can make significant progress towards this end with some relatively minor adjustments to an already successful federal fisheries management framework. In general, we support many of the reform provisions contained in H.R. 200, and we hope the subcommittee will consider these as well. First and foremost, we must provide more flexibility to the councils. The current rebuilding and ACL requirements are too rigid to apply universally to all fish stocks. To start, we can eliminate the 10-year rebuilding time requirement, replace it with a biologically based foundation, and rely on our regional councils to determine the optimal path to stock rebuilding. We support changing language in Section 304 of the Act from possible to practicable in terms of rebuilding periods. The intent of this relatively simple change is not to allow fisheries managers unfettered permission to set harvest levels wherever they choose, but rather to allow them to better protect fishing communities without undermining conservation objectives. We support defining overfishing and changing the term overfished to depleted throughout the Act. This term overfished unfairly implicates the industry for stock conditions beyond our control. We also support adding a comprehensive definition to the term catch share in the Act. Especially important is the inclusion of processors in this definition. This would not mandate that harvesting shares be awarded to processors, but it is simply a recognition that in certain fisheries where there's heavy reliance on shoreside processing capacity, consideration can be given to this critical infrastructure when allocating fishing privileges. We strongly support the inclusion of language that will ensure consistent fisheries management under competing federal statutes, including the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, the Antiquities Act, and the Endangered Species Act, with specific acknowledgement that the MSA is to be the controlling federal statute to manage our fisheries. Our intent is not to circumvent these other laws, but rather to apply a proven, successful, transparent public process to managing our fisheries. Last, I would like to briefly mention S-1520, the Modernizing Recreational Fisheries Management Act of 2017, which was recently referred to committee. I believe that all fisheries stakeholders must be accountable for their impacts on fishery resources, and we should resist any efforts to undermine these requirements. We have concerns that S-1520 and its counterpart, HR 2023, as drafted, could potentially subvert conservation by exempting private anglers from accountability measures with little federal oversight or MSA consistency. These bills would also handicap the National Exempted Fishing Permit, EFP, process with an overly prescriptive set of requirements. Throughout 2016 and 17, we have struggled mightily with NOAA to implement a critical EFP program to ease regulatory burdens and provide us access to healthy groundfish stocks on the West Coast. Why would we want to make that process harder? We are willing to work with this subcommittee and other groups to seek improvements to ensure the long-term sustainability of fisheries resources for all stakeholders. We believe recreational and commercial fishing interests want what is best for their communities, and that proper MSA reform is a necessary component. Thank you for holding this hearing today and for your intention to consider important MSA reform during the session of Congress. I'm happy to answer any questions that you or other members may have.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Steele. And Mr. Andrew, I think you win the award for coming the furthest to testify, so thank you for doing that. And the floor is yours.
Oyana, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. My name is Peter Andrew, Jr. I live in Dillingham, Alaska. As the good senator said, that I've been a commercial fisherman all of my life. I'm a subsistence user. Bristol Bay is in southwest Alaska. I'm also the president of our local utility. I serve on American Seafoods Advisory Board and on the board of director of the Bristol Bay Seafood Development Association. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, by enhanced opportunities for local fishing fleets, by allowing federal and state governments to work together, has been of great benefit to the people of Bristol Bay. I've experienced this firsthand. In 1971, my brother, when I was 9 years old, took me out fishing because I was worth some gear. And back then, there was hardly any fish to catch. And then after enactment of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, some years later, the stocks in Bristol Bay started to rebound. What was happening was offshore interception was happening, and after this act was enacted, it substantially changed the lives of many fishers that live in Bristol Bay. Our success continues today. This summer, another historical run. Overall, this year, our commercial fishermen caught, processed, and shipped more than 39 million pounds around the world. What's more, despite the significant increase in supply and prices paid to fishermen, the prices continue to increase. In fact, we had 17 days, many of those days, 17 continuous days of over 1 million sockeye caught, and many of those days exceeding 2 million. While we can always improve, 2017 was another bumper year for us. As it has for 130 years, our fishery will produce jobs, sustain our communities for generations as long as it's properly managed and, when necessary, protected. No wild salmon fishery in the world comes close to matching the productivity of Bristol Bay. Bristol Bay reliably provides 50% of the world's sockeye salmon production. Bristol Bay brings billions of dollars annually to our local, state, and national economies and supports over 20,000 jobs, catching, processing, delivering our salmon to market. The economic importance of the fishery extends well beyond Bristol Bay, in particular significant to the west coast of the states of Washington, Oregon, and California. Consumers, increasingly aware of attributes of the health of attributes of wild salmon versus farm salmon, are now seeking our wild salmon product. Bristol Bay and its fishermen benefit from the reputation that precedes them. As important as commercial fishing is to our people, so is subsistence. I brought a nice little jar here I may share with one of your members there. It defines our culture.
Well, I love that. I get a lot of it, so I will make sure I share it with my senator colleague from Michigan here to
Thank you,
taste
Mr.
the great Alaskan wild salmon.
Okay. Also, it defines our culture as well, as you're well aware of it, Mr. Chairman. Commercial sport fishing and subsistence fishing are two pillars of the fishing-based economy in Bristol Bay. The third is the quantity and quality of our amazing fish attract thousands of visitors each year where they stay in lodges, hire guides, buy supplies while participating in a bucket list trip. Sports fishing in Bristol Bay watershed accounts for approximately $60.5 million in annual spending. Roughly 37,000 sport fishing trips were taken on the Bristol Bay region. The sport fishing activities directly employ over 850 full-time and part-time workers. Bristol Bay, it is a true mecca of sport fishing men and women. It's phenomenal. The tourism forgive me, but the sport fishery in Bristol Bay benefits many who live in the region, including BBNC and its 10,000 shareholders. Recognize the importance of tourism to the region. BBNC has made substantial investments in lodges throughout the Bay, thus enhancing opportunities for local employment, as well as opportunities to share culture and the incredible environment with the people around the world. What an experience this year was. We had another huge record run. It's just unbelievable. Boats were sinking, people couldn't take their net fish, and so on. Our fishery is robust, healthy, because of strict compliance with proven science-based management model, protection of pristine watershed conditions, and I would add a robust and transparent federal and state fisheries management process. This week, we are celebrating this invaluable resource here in D.C. with the Alaska Wild Salmon Day, featuring the bounty of our region. Chairman Sullivan, as you appreciate the uniqueness of Bristol Bay, and we're pleased to give you BBNC's Fish First Award this year for your work on salmon issues.
I'm very honored. Thank you.
BBNC and the people of Bristol Bay put fish first and are proud to have a delegation that knows and understands the philosophy too. In conclusion, the people of Bristol Bay, we know we live in one of the most incredible places on earth, if well managed, can sustain for thousands of years into the future. Ted Stevens knew this, and also Warren Magnuson. I'm glad that 4 decades later, we still have an Alaskan senator, a Washington senator on this committee championing the values inherent to the Magnuson-Stevens Act that allows our Bristol Bay salmon to be successful. Thank you for the opportunity, Senator.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew. Mr. Domenico.
There you go. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Senator Mr. Peters, I want to thank you for taking such a serious interest in our issues. They're very important to us, and I'm going to try to do my best on behalf of our members from the Garden State Seafood Association to tell you the 4 most important topics. First is NOAA's interpretation and implementation of the 2006 Magnuson Amendments is threatening the viability of the domestic seafood industry. Secondly, our access to traditional and productive fishing grounds are being altered by marine monuments, sanctuaries, marine protected areas, and national ocean policy. Number 3, the struggle of fisheries management with estimating recreational fishing mortality. Number 4, the potential for the unfair implementation of catch shares. The domestic seafood industry has suffered since 2006 Magnuson Amendments. NOAA's interpretation was designed to be precautionary and its implementation risk-averse. The most significant application of this policy is scientific uncertainty. In place is a systematic erosion of a founding principle of the Magnuson-Stevens Act to such an extent we have lost our ability to achieve optimum yield on a continuing basis. Optimum yield is no longer possible. The result? Diminished opportunities, inefficiencies, and quite frankly, a waste of a natural resource. There are solutions. We support eliminating the 10-year time frame for rebuilding overfished fisheries and replacing it with a strong, science-based, flexible approach. We support substituting the term overfished with depleted. In some cases, depleted much better characterizes the situation with a particular stock. We support expanding the existing ACL exemptions for short-lived species to include species with unique life history. We support an amendment from annual catch limits for transboundary stocks. Second, and quite frankly, most timely, a well-orchestrated effort is underway using the Antiquities Act, the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, the National Ocean Policy to reduce fishing access in regions across this country, both coasts. We're extremely disappointed by the prior administration's establishment of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, National Marine Monument designation, and the resulting fishing prohibitions. We have every reason to believe that a network of marine protected areas will be designated from the Gulf of Maine to the Gulf of Mexico. We are looking for your help. How can you help? We need this committee to make sure that the dominant regulatory authority is the Magnuson-Stevens Act. It should, of course, achieve goals, conservation goals, with some of these other entities, but quite frankly, we need to have it as the statutory authority over marine sanctuaries, marine monuments, and the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. Number three, the inability of fisheries management to control and estimate recreational fishing mortality. This situation continues to plague numerous fisheries around the nation, including red snapper, black sea bass, and summer flounder. The most serious impact is its effect on stock assessments. Recently, it's been estimated that the recreational fishing mortality may be and may have been 4 times higher in the Mid-Atlantic than previously expected. The result is a perpetual state of uncertainty for all stakeholders. The resulting controversy has consumed regional councils and the Magnuson debate for years and has resulted in several bills over the last few congressional sessions, including the current one. We feel strongly Senate Bill 1520, the Modernizing Recreational Fisheries Management Act, is an attack on the management process and a clear path towards exempting recreational fishing from the same accountability measures that are required of the commercial fishing industry. But with all that said, there are solutions that we can support. We recognize the negative impacts on the recreational industry. We can support funds being made available to the states to transfer the responsibilities of accounting and reporting, but we hope and would ask that they do not raid the National Saltonstall Kennedy program, set aside for commercial fishing. We can support alternative management for recreational fisheries only if they are consistent with the current MSA requirements and clear federal management authority and oversight is maintained. But we cannot support any changes that attempt to solve the lack of recreational accountability by reallocating the resource from the commercial industry or provide any exemptions to annual catch limits to the recreational industry. I just would like to take 30 seconds. I know I'm reaching the time limit. I would like to say one thing about catch shares. We're asking for only one thing for this committee to do and to understand. Currently, there's no referendum required to place a catch share in a region on a group of fishermen who have dedicated their lives to a particular fishery. They do not get a vote or a say whether or not catch shares would be implemented into their fishery. Now, 10 years ago, Magnuson amendments made it perfectly clear that quota decisions would be out of the realm of the industry. It would be strictly for the SSCs and the councils to decide. If that's true, then why not at least let the industry be involved in the management? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that testimony, Captain Cochran. The floor is yours.
Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Members Peters, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Bubba Cochran, and I'm a commercial fisherman from Galveston, Texas. I'm the president of the Gulf of Mexico Reef Fish Shareholders Alliance and the vice president of Gulf Wild Seafood brand. I fished my entire life. I own and operate my own commercial fishing boat using hook and line to catch reef fish. I spend over 100 days a year fishing and another 15 to 20 days attending meetings of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council and traveling to Washington to speak to you, your staff, and other decision makers. My 14-year-old son, Connor, who's probably watching this hearing right now when he should be doing his homework, loves to fish and will someday take over my business. I'm here today to represent my organization, Gulf Commercial Fishermen, the 97% of Americans who access fresh fish by purchasing it in restaurants, grocery stores, and fish markets that we supply, and my son, Connor. We have an obligation to pass on something truly sustainable to him and others like him. A number of witnesses today complained that Magnuson-Stevens is not working. My business and ability to provide for my family depends on healthy fish stocks. I'm here today to ask that we work together to support Magnuson-Stevens and safeguard the gains made since its last reauthorization. And I'm here to tell you that Magnuson-Stevens is a success story, your success story. Magnuson-Stevens is working. Fishing is profitable. Fish stocks are rebuilding. More anglers are able to go catch fish, and American seafood consumers have year-round access to sustainably harvest fish. 41 stocks have been rebuilt since 2001, and the number of stocks on the overfishing and overfished list remains near all-time lows. Some groups say that quota and catch limits don't work for recreational fishermen. This is simply not true. Between 2010 and 2016, recreational fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico successfully caught up to 96% of their gag grouper quota without exceeding the recreational catch limits. Some groups say that IFQs are not suitable for mixed-use fisheries such as Gulf red snapper. As someone whose business depends on IFQs, I'd like to provide some facts. IFQs saved the red snapper fishery in the Gulf of Mexico. Before the IFQs were implemented, we fished a derby. We were fishing on 2 to 3 pound fish and many times discarded more than we landed. We fished in dangerous weather and some boats never made it back to port. Since the red snapper IFQ, things have gotten much better. Quotas have increased, the prices come up, discards are way down, and the red snapper we're catching are much larger than what we caught before the IFQ. I can now stay home when it is blowing 35 knots because I can spread out my quota throughout the year, and I have more control over my business, and I've learned that sustainability and profitability go hand in hand. Thanks to Magnuson-Stevens' science-based conservation requirements and the commercial IFQ program, the red snapper quota for all fishermen in the Gulf has nearly tripled in the last 10 years from 5 million pounds to nearly 14 million pounds. Clearly, the commercial IFQ has not harmed recreational fishermen. And let me stress that accountability, fishing within the rules, not exceeding harvest limits, timely reporting of catch, and proper monitoring have been key to this success. This is our success as it is yours. Yes, it's true that the federal recreational red snapper season has shrunk in the Gulf, and I understand that private anglers want a longer federal red snapper season. However, as the U.S. Department of Commerce admits, bypassing conservation measures and science-based management will result in recreational sector substantially exceeding its annual catch limit and delay rebuilding the stock by as many as 6 years. We support the Gulf states and federal government working together to develop a sustainable, accountable, science-based solution to the Gulf of Mexico private angler fishing challenges. Red snapper is a critical species for Gulf commercial fishermen. Since recreational fishermen already take home 80% of the most popular fish in the Gulf, including overwhelming majorities of amberjack, king mackerel, and triggerfish, even if the federal red snapper fishing season cannot be as long as they want, recreational fishermen can fish for these other species in federal waters. On a final note, I want to reiterate that red snapper are a public resource, and commercial fishermen provide public access to millions of consumers who cannot afford to catch it themselves. From the businessman in Detroit to the teacher in Denver to the nurse in Indianapolis, commercial fishermen give them the opportunity they deserve to enjoy some of the best seafood the world has to offer. Magnuson-Stevens is about more than just Gulf red snapper. It's also about Alaskan halibut, New England codfish, and Georgia grouper. Magnuson-Stevens is about Florida charter fishing businessmen, the California recreational fishermen, and the South Dakota family that has just as much right to order a red snapper fillet off the menu as I do. We all have an obligation to protect fisheries
the fishery recoveries we've experienced under the last 10 years of Magnuson-Stevens. We owe it to the next generation, like my son Connor, to pass on a natural resource legacy that ensures sustainable public access for future generations of Americans. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Captain Cochran, and I want to thank all the panelists for their outstanding testimony. Let me begin with just a very basic question. It's the focus of this and the other hearings. From your perspective, and I'll just ask each of you to provide a brief answer here, what are the one or two things that we can do in the Congress in this reauthorization to help improve our fisheries management system from your perspective? Start with you, Ms. Steele.
Thank you. I think that the one thing that Congress can do in this reauthorization is focus any changes in the law on the fundamental and original goal of this law, which is to achieve optimum yield. Finding the balance between biological health and economic prosperity. That can be done through providing flexibility in both the rebuilding requirements and the ACL provisions in the law. In the interest of time, I'll just refer you to our written testimony, which has several suggestions along those lines. Thank you.
Mr. Andrew, any thoughts on that question? Basic question, reauthorization, top priorities.
I think that the Alaska model is an excellent model to maybe take a good hard look at, given trust to the state of Alaska to manage for sustained yield as far as fisheries. The North Pacific Management Council, science-based, really looks good. So as you know, as well as I do, the fisheries are very healthy in our state, and we're very thankful.
Yep. Thank you. Mr. DiDomicino.
How's that? There you go. Well, I'll be as brief as possible on a difficult topic.
Top priorities.
Yeah. What we're asking for is this subcommittee to have very, very direct and clear intent to be added to the Magnuson-Stevens Act. We, as I said earlier, we had suffered over the last 10 years because of the interpretation of the last time this law was reauthorized. I would suggest that the 10-year time frame absolutely have some added flexibility to it. We're not the only ones saying that. National Academy of Science has admitted that that's arbitrary. Continued rebuilding flexibility, that's science-based in other contexts of the law. Admitting the difference between depleted and overfished. Expand the short-lived exemptions for certain fisheries, some that are very of great interest to us, and exempt transboundary stocks from ACLs. Thank you.
Captain Cochran.
Well, I'd be more interested to say what not to do, and I would hate to see any reauthorization roll back to conservation efforts that Magnuson has been successful with. And I'll also say that when it comes to data collection and the science, I think that, you know, we could possibly solve some of the recreational problems with coupling that better with the technology. I think one of the witnesses earlier was talking about using a smartphone to report their landings. And every recreational fisherman I talk to, the biggest problem they have with the numbers that are coming in on their landings is that who asked me how many fish I caught? And I've never talked to a recreational fisherman that wasn't willing to be accountable.
Right.
And in earlier questions asking that the recreational sector not be held to the same standards as the commercial, I think that's an unfair advantage, and I don't think it would get them or us anywhere.
Let me, I'm going to ask Mr. Andrew a couple more parochial questions since you traveled all this way and you're one of my constituents. 2017, as you mentioned, saw a near record sockeye salmon run. What was the total number?
Thank you, Mr. Senator. I mean, Congress. Jeez, I'm so nervous I could.
Oh, you're doing great.
Blink 5 times.
You're doing great,
Mr. Chairman. I think this year's total numbers are probably pushing about 62 million escapement and harvest.
It's remarkable. That's one salmon run. That's the biggest salmon run in the world.
Yes.
Let me ask, in terms of one of the things that you've mentioned, you note the economic impact of the Bristol Bay fisheries. One of the concerns that I share, I believe, with you and many others in the region are the number of permits issued to non-Alaskans. Is there a way to reverse the trend of permits leaving Alaska's communities?
I think today the majority of the permits that are issued in Bristol Bay are owned by state residents, but watershed residents, there's a little bit of a shift, I guess. But through the Magnuson-Stevens Act, it created Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation. There are some programs within that, within BBEDC that help local fishermen to purchase permits, help fishermen with leases and so on to get these younger fishermen into the fishery. So it's a very successful model, and I hope that it will work. 'Cause as you know, we're getting older.
We are, indeed. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you to our witnesses, for all of you, for excellent testimony as we sort through a very complex issue here to do what we can that's best for the fishing industry and for a very important resource for our country. Mr. Andrew, I just want to start by saying I appreciated learning about Bristol Bay, because actually I had the privilege of being on the Coast Guard ice-breaking tug, Bristol Bay, which operates out of Detroit in the Great Lakes, part of our ice-breaking fleet there. And when I go back there, I'm going to be able to tell them a whole lot about the name Bristol Bay and why this is such an important operation. But thank you for sharing that. Very interesting. And thank you for, on short notice, coming here a very, very long way. Captain Cochran, first question is for you. We certainly know that fisheries are facing a very changing environment right now as climate change is changing water temperatures. We've got changes in chemistry. Some of the science related to this is complicated. And for your son to take over the business someday when he gets done with his homework and graduates from school, as he's working on right now, this is going to require quite a bit of long-range planning to figure out how we maintain the sustainability of this fishing stock. My first question is, you spend an awful lot of time out on the water. You mentioned over 100 days per year. What changes have you noticed when you go out there? What do we need to know? What sort of changes in the environment as you go out fishing?
Well, fortunately, red snapper are very, very resilient, and we have our own challenges in the Gulf with other things like dead zones and things like that could interact with the fisheries. But as far as climate change and water temperature, I couldn't really identify any definite changes as of right now. But the future holds, definitely something different. Everything's going to change, no matter how subtle and no matter how long. I think we are in store for some type of change. I will say that, and this might not have anything to do with the climate change, but it seems that in Galveston, where we have a lot shallower shelf and it takes longer to get out to deep water, that it appears that the inshore fishing for the red snapper that we mostly target is moving further and further offshore without any real significant explanation. I mean, there's so many snapper out there, you would think they'd be right off the beachfront, but for some reason they're not. And I've been fishing my whole life, and I've never seen red snapper fishing so good, but I've also never seen it so much further than it normally would be, and it's probably more the depth of water, not how far, because further down the coast, they haven't really been seeing that. But the deeper water is closer, down, say, towards Rockport or Corpus Christi.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I'll continue, Captain Cochran. Several folks have called for more flexibility in fisheries management, which we've heard over and over again. But just last October, NOAA issued an update to the National Standard 1 guidelines to help some more tools in the toolbox, given fisheries management flexibility that many have asked for. What reactions have you seen to this update and the flexibility that it provides?
Well, the big question is what kind of flexibility are they talking about? Are they talking about eliminating ACLs or, it just depends on what kind of flexibility, we're talking about. I think it's important to use like using Magnuson and its conservation science-based management to work with flexibility instead of the flexibility working around that.
Okay. Well, and many of you have raised the scientific uncertainty or issues related to scientific management. Ms. Steele, you raised the issue caused by insufficient data and scientific uncertainty. From your perspective, how can we best fill in these gaps to address the problems that you mentioned in your testimony?
Well, I think that the best way to fill in the gaps is to support the collection of data within the framework of the law. I've seen, in my experience, many situations that are data poor or lacking in terms of data to make management decisions, yet the decisions have to be made. And what we've done in the past, instead of trying to exempt ourselves from the law or trying to get some sort of exemption to deal in other ways with those issues, is worked within the confines of the law to try to improve the science and provide the best available science to the councils to make decisions. I think that the framework in the Magnuson Act provides for that, and we just need to do a better job of managing our fisheries with the best available data under this framework.
Anyone else like to comment? I know all of you have mentioned scientific uncertainty or the need for more science. Any ideas for the panel here, please? Any? No? Okay. Very good. Thank you.
I think a few more questions here. I think Senator Cantwell might be on the way, and if so, just give me a heads up on that. But Mr. Andrew, let me go back to another question. This is a little more concerning. Actually, I wish Senator Cantwell was here to hear the question, but you know, we have concerns. We obviously value the Alaska wild salmon as the best salmon on the planet, you know, the biggest runs on the planet, the best tasting on the planet, relative to GMO seafood or farm-raised fish. As you know, earlier this year, there was a fish farm in Washington State that had a net failure, resulting in a spill of Atlantic salmon into the ecosystem. Can you provide some insights into what a spill like this could do or potentially do to the wild fisheries that are so prominent? And again, I think, you know, in many ways the most revered in the world, like we have in Alaska, and what your concerns are for the community and the, you know, the viability of the Bristol Bay fishery.
Thank you, Senator. Quite honestly, I mean, I've had 24 hours to prepare for this testimony, so I am just running just a little bit behind regarding that. But yeah, in Western Alaska, every single river that is in Bristol Bay produces wild salmon. So I think that there's a predatory threat that would be that would make us worry a lot. Also the market factor of wild stocks. You know, there's a whole gamut of things that I can't really pinpoint at this time.
Well, we're going to continue from this committee's perspective to continue to monitor those kind of situations. You know, there's always these assurances, oh, don't worry, there won't be a mix in terms of the different kind of farm-raised and wild salmon, but, you know, that seems to have happened, and I certainly have some concerns about it. I know a lot of our fellow Alaskans do as well, so we will continue to monitor that. Mr. DiMonticino, I want to just two points that you raised that I'd like to just touch on. We had a previous hearing, actually, related to the use of Antiquities Act over the MSA that a lot of us have concern, and I agree with your assessment that the main management tool needs to be the MSA, not the other provisions that weren't supposed to manage fisheries. You know, most witnesses over the last 3 different hearings that we've had have all said what you have said. Yeah, the Act needs some tweaks and some adjustments, but it's working well. And I agree fully that we should not be looking as the main management tools of America's fisheries, acts that, to be honest, weren't designed to bring in the science, bring in the data that you are all talking about with regard to the MSA and how important that is. So I appreciate you highlighting that in your testimony. I'd also like you to just dig a little bit deeper on the issue that's come up a couple times in testimony today on the importance of terms like depleted versus overfished, and why you believe, or others on the panel think, that that should be altered as we look in the reauthorization of the MSA. Why is that a priority of yours?
Well, as so many people have already said, the variable nature of these fisheries, I believe, are much more, susceptible to those fluctuations from environmental conditions or just natural fluctuations than harvest.
Yeah.
And why would you not just label a fishery or a stock overfished when you know that the condition of the stock has nothing to do with removals?
So you're just trying to be more accurate. You're essentially saying that overfished is a term that can be used, and sometimes it's accurate, we know that that's a fact, but other times it's being used in a way to describe situations where it's not accurate.
It could very easily trigger a rebuilding plan for issues outside of U.S. fisheries and U.S. waters. There could be, we've got many pelagic fish, we've got a whole host of fish that range from outside jurisdiction of U.S. waters. Why would you penalize U.S. fishermen for something that's happening somewhere else?
Great. Let me ask one final question. I believe Senator Cantwell's on her way, so we'll leave this open. Ms. Steele, you've had kind of a unique perspective on the MSA from different kind of regional fisheries approaches. Do you think the MSA in its current form provides enough regional flexibility? And that's certainly one of the things that we're trying to do on this panel, looking at not only Alaska and other places, but on the East Coast, in the Gulf. Do you believe it provides enough regional flexibility to apply conservation and management measures that can match the needs and challenges of each geographically unique area? Or does something need to be more to be done on that?
I certainly think that's the intent of the act, and I certainly support that. I do think that we can do more to provide the regional councils with the flexibility and the tools, essentially, that they need to be able to manage to the needs of the ecosystem and their regional areas. I worked in New England, now I work on the West Coast. I've seen it in both situations. And the councils, the regional council process is a really wonderful vehicle for addressing fisheries and ecosystem issues. I think that what we need to do is, as Mr. DiDomenico mentioned earlier, is provide the councils with more flexibility to be able to, to clarify the intent with respect to the flexibility provided to the councils. I think that can be done with clarifications like changing possible to practicable and things like that to make sure that, that the councils have the flexibility to make the decisions and tailor the rebuilding plans and management measures to meet the needs of not only their fisheries, but the communities that depend on them.
So those are the priority legislative fixes that you would have from your association's perspective?
Yes, flexibility for the rebuilding time frame, as well as flexibility in the development of annual catch limits, all within the confines of the conservation objectives of the plan.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew, is there anything more? You know, we had this great run, but we actually saw that there was some processor capacity issues in Bristol Bay. Is there anything that we need to be looking at that can help us address some of those challenges, which in some ways are good challenges to have, right? You have a very big run, a stable, high price, but what can we be doing in that regard? And are there any things that you think we should be looking at in this legislation?
That was actually going to be my question. What a great problem to have.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of things are not, you can't plan for everything.
Right.
And certain situations happen to certain processors that just make processing difficult. It may be employee-based, it may be mechanical, and so on. I know that probably several of them had issues in those areas, but competition's always good. Yeah. And, you know, if there was a situation that we could allow more competition, it'd be great for the region and for the fishers. But the Nushagak, where I predominantly fish, this year we had foregone harvest, which means the number of fish that escaped into the region above and beyond the escapement level was in excess of 6 million. Wow. So that was 6 million fish that could have been harvested that was foregone. In other words, it just padded the number of spawners. Yeah. So maybe in 5 years, there's going to be another huge run. Who knows? But I'm not a scientist. I've been a catcher all my life.
Great. Well, listen, I want to thank the panel again, the witnesses, for the outstanding testimony here. And like I did with the last panel, I want to remind all of you the record for this hearing will remain open for an additional 2 weeks. During this time, we may have other senators from the committee who could not make it here, or others who have questions, additional questions. They may submit questions for the record, and upon receipt, we would respectfully ask the witnesses to submit their written answers to the committee as soon as possible. I want to thank all of you again for hearing today. This hearing is now adjourned.